Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Thanks again for joining us. So Matthew is back from Germany and Europe. Matthew, how was your trip?
It was really wonderful. Had a wonderful experience, traveled around, and got to sample some mighty fine cannabis along the way.
Excellent. But we've had in your absence, we've had 3 requests from Patreon supporters, and I want to address them in this episode, if you don't mind. One is that we had a little less ramble at the beginning, so for this episode, no ramble, okay?
You got it.
Number 2 is, what's the deal with the Emerald Cup in California? It's typically in Santa Rosa, and Santa Rosa was devastated by the wildfires there. And number 3 came from Jeremy Metz, who's another Patreon supporter, who was really sent a very heartfelt note about how he can talk to his teenagers about cannabis in this brave new world of legalization. And for that, we've interviewed Marsha Rosenbaum, who is one of the smartest and most educated researchers on how to talk to teens about all substance use. And she's a big member of the DPA and has been a friend and a colleague for many years. So I'm very happy that she was able to make the time to talk to us. Are you ready to rock and roll on this episode?
I'm down if you're ready, so let's just pay some bills real quick and then get right into it.
Okay, who we paying?
Well, first and foremost, we need to give a shout out to The Fresh Toast, who is our syndication partner, publishing all of these wonderful podcasts for their readership as well as our listenership. So thanks to you guys. Visit thefreshtoast.com. And then, of course, our partnership with the Fueled by Deathcast, the creators of the podcast from the brand of Death Wish Coffee.
Whoa, how did we get on this podcast?
I'm not sure, but I like it here.
It's pretty great, but we should probably tell everyone about our own podcast, Fueled by Deathcast.
Hell yeah. Comes out every Thursday from the Death Wish Coffee Company, the world's strongest coffee.
Every week you can hear me, the Incredible Jeff.
And me, the amazing D-Man.
And we talk about new science discoveries, breaking news from Death Wish Coffee, and we welcome a special guest from rock stars to astronauts and ask them all the question, what fuels you?
The podcast is available right on deathwishcoffee.com and wherever podcasts are found, including iTunes, Google Music, Stitcher, and more.
Plus, you can now watch it live on the Death Wish Coffee Company page on Facebook and watch all our videos over on YouTube.
All right. Now you know all about Fueled by Deathcast and how you can listen to it.
But first, let's finish this podcast.
Let's get back to the show.
So the first segment of this episode is with Tim Blake. Tim is the founder of the Emerald Cup, which, folks, I have to say, if you've never been to a cannabis event, this is the money shot. This is the one to go to. It's a harvest festival that happens every December in Northern California. And I went a couple of years ago for the first time, and it was a brilliant experience. It's a mix of a 4-H club, a science fair, and maybe a little bit of a biker convention. It's got a great mix of people, a great mix of ways to educate, ways to medicate, and an extraordinary sampling of all of California's finest. It really is the sine qua non of all cannabis festivals. I highly recommend, if you're in the area in early December, try to make a trip to Santa Rosa. And the great news is that the wildfires, even though they devastated the community, managed to miss the Santa Rosa Fairgrounds where the event takes place. So let's talk to Tim right now. Tim, how are you today?
Excellent. We got some rain up here, so fires are going out. It's a good day.
So Tim, the fires really devastated Santa Rosa, which is where the Emerald Cup's been held for so many years, the last 3 or 4 years. What are you going to do this year?
Well, we're right now thanking God for the small miracles that the fairgrounds did not have to be evacuated or burned down. And our primary hotel, the Flamingo, didn't burn down. It got to the parking lot, and I think it touched a couple of outbuildings, but we thought that we'd lost the Flamingo along with them losing the Hilton, which was one of our hotels in the Fountain Grove. So, we've gone from where that was going to be an absolute disaster to where now we're just dealing with the challenges of finding enough hotels for people because you've got 20,000 people displaced.
Amazing. So you got really lucky. You're the one good thing that happened, the one good note that happened in this fire, huh?
There was quite a few miracles that happened, along with, of course, tragedies throughout. But the town of Willits looked like it may be, in the path and wiped out by the fire, and that didn't happen. So we're very thankful that Willits didn't get it. They did stop it before it burned up much of Potter Valley. So we were very happy about that too. But overall, it's unbelievable the damage that fire did. But did not take out downtown Santa Rosa either. At one point, they were ready to evacuate downtown Santa Rosa, which would have just been an absolute disaster in itself, of course.
So let's talk to a little bit about what the Emerald Cup is now. I mean, when I first I know this started on your farm, and 20 years ago, did you start doing this as a harvest festival?
It was 14 years ago up at Area 101, our event center campground, 10 miles north of Laytonville in the heart of the Triangle. It was just a small celebration of the fall harvest in a friendly competition. And I never would have believed that it would turn into 30,000 people in the size and scope of what it is now. It's, that was not in our minds at the time.
Amazing. I mean, when I was there a couple of years ago, I described it as like a science fair meets a 4-H club meets a biker convention. How do you describe it now?
That's not a bad description. It's the biker.
Thank you, Tim.
It's such an amazing evolution. We only had flowers at the beginning, and it was a celebration. It was an all-night party. And now you've got so many different contests. It's hard to keep track of them. You've got the speaker stages, 3 of them, which are pretty much full house for all of them because the education's become so critically important. And you've got the whole community coming together. It's really kind of a gathering of the tribe for the end of the season there. So it's got a little of everything. And then, of course, now because we're in Santa Rosa, you've got all the patients coming together and all the public coming to mingle with all the farmers. So it really is. It's a gathering of the tribe with this really massive educational component, some of the best music around, and the 215 area that just blows people away.
215 named after Proposition 215, which is where people can consume openly, correct?
Yeah, and they go do all the work, and the business and stuff goes out of there. So, we started off with a little tiny medicinal area. The first year at the fairgrounds was only about 50 booths, and it was in the grass area where they serve food. Now it's in a place called the Little Cow Palace, which is about 2 football fields, and now we've added another acre full of tents and additional areas, and we've gone from 215 booths to several hundred, along with the non-medical booths. So we have over 500 booths now.
Wow. And how many people come? Did you say 30,000?
It's about 15,000 a day. It's a pretty packed house. We've really almost outgrown it, but it's very intimate there. People like it. It's easy access to the hotels, and it's comfortable. So we've made a new partnership with a group that we're talking about doing several more shows and going across the country nationally over the next couple of years.
Oh, wow. So this is going to be competition to the High Times Cannabis Cups, right?
It's a friendly competition. I know Matt fairly well, one of the producers of High Times. They came in after us. They weren't really doing any shows here in the States until about, 5 or 6 years ago. They were based over in Europe. Once we broke the doors down for these types of events to go on, they came over here and rapidly went across the country. I don't know how many events they have now, but they've definitely staked their flag and done that. But we'll be going around the country likewise and doing a lot of shows. We're a little different, kind of a different direction in what we do. We're hardcore organic and solventless up to this point, and we're just a different feel, all organic, merchandise and everything else. So, but High Times talked about doing a partnership with us, and at one point Matt said, if you don't join us, we'll become you. And they're quickly doing that. They've really evolved to where they've really brought the organic message in, and their music's kind of changed. And they've really they got Alex Gray doing a poster this year, who we've worked with in the past. So Matt's right. They are becoming us, and I guess I should be flattered by that because that's a high form of respect.
I call that flattery. So the amazing thing about the Emerald Cup that amazes me, it was repetitive, but is that you have so many strains that people are testing. How many strains do you plan this year? Or how many came in last year?
We had about 650 entries in the flowers. It was really, we ended up with 1,200 entries overall. And we were going to shut the competition down the day before Thanksgiving. And through a little mistake somehow, we were just going to take entries in at our primary Northern California locations. But we kept them open at all the sites. And we ended up with 800 entries the last week, which just overwhelmed our testing labs, our judges, everybody. And we worked day and night to run that contest, and it was a challenge. So we've had to make some changes this year to even move the further deadline up again.
So in the old days, the judges used to smoke every strain. How is it possible to really be a judge and smoke 600 strains and make a judgment? Is it possible?
Well, no, what we do is we've actually come up with some pretty sophisticated means. First of all, we have the contest open for 5 weeks, so they're not smoking it in that short of a time. When we now that we test everything, we need more time so that they're not testing things that fail. And what the judges do now is they go through. We get 14 judges together. They spend a whole day looking, smelling, tasting every one of the entries together in a room at Area 101, and they pick out the 150 or 200 that they don't really think are going to have a chance to come in the top 20. And so they get it down.
Is that based on aroma and looks? How do they judge?
They do that on looks, smell. They'll taste some of them. They go through. They go through all of it, and then they really get it down to about 400. And then what they do is they split that into 3 judges groups, and then those judges go out and come back with their top 50 in those, and then so they get down to 150, and then they spend another day looking at all that with their numbers, and all the judges get to look at each other's, and they get that down to a top 50, and then those judges go home for 5 days with that top 50. And in the meanwhile, the 200 that didn't get originally put in, we have another set of judges go through that 200 again and look to see if there's anything that the judges might have missed that they want to add to that pile. And, the last 2 years, out of that 200, there's probably 2 or 3 that those secondary judges will go, you know what, you should check these out. None of those have ever come in the top 20, but they have gotten very thoroughly checked out and put in for consideration. So we've got a pretty good idea of how to do this. And, with wine tasting, you look at wine tasting, those people sit down and go through hundreds of wine. They take very small sips. They spit it out. They're not even drinking it. And they go through, 200-300 bottles of wine in a day or two by doing that. The thing with us is we do want to take into consideration the high in our scoring.
Yeah.
It's a double score. We have a 1 to 50 grade for each entry, and it's a 1 to 10 on the smell, taste, and look, and then a 1 to 10 on the high, but the high gets a double score. So it's still weighted to how it gets you high. And, so we need our judges to smoke that cannabis, and they do.
And are you still judging yourself?
I've never judged. I felt like because I took the intake in for the first several years, and of course our intake people really shouldn't be judging because they're seeing who's bringing it in. They know friends and family or different people, and so we've never allowed the intake people to judge. I will say in the old days, and even now, the intake people, I would like them to be judges because really when you see almost every entry and you break them down into the different little bottles for the judges, you see even more than the judges. And over the years, the intake people, in my case, several years ago, I was able to tell the number one entry from the first day of just bringing it all and looking at it all. I could tell right then. And in the past, we've had a couple different intake people. One of them is now the guy that leads our farms in genetics, who have done the same thing. They've looked at every one of them, and their numbers, we let them just pick just for the fun of it, and their numbers most of the time are as good or better than all the other judges.
Just from looking at it and smelling it, is that what you're saying?
Well, no, but they'll smoke the very best. They'll look at it and go, okay, I want to smoke these 5. I think these are like the 5 best. So I want to smoke these, and they smoke them, and they'll go, okay, out of these 5 or 10, this is my best one or my 2 best. And our intake people have been right on many years out of the contest unknown. So, we've got really quality people doing that. And, when you look at that much and you know what you're doing, you know what's fire or not, and you know what's really unique, what's the good, the unique profiles and stuff. So, but, it's a wonderful thing. And the judges love doing it. It's interesting. Over the years, we had some really long-time judges. Kevin Jodry from up there in Wonderland Nursery, and Pearl, Pearl Moon, and I can go back through the list. And really, we're down to just Nikki and Swami from the original crew of judges over the last 14 years. As you'll find, if you're a judge, I've had a lot of kids come in and say, well, I'll just smoke these old-time judges under the table. And they come in and they realize by the time you do 6 weeks worth of judging with that many entries, it's quite a process.
I think that's putting it very mildly. Let me ask you, California makes a distinction. The growers in California make a large distinction between sun-grown and indoor-grown cannabis. How do you describe the difference in taste and quality and high and health?
Well, it's night and day. Give me a tomato plant and put it inside a garage and grow it and see what that's going to look like and taste like. Give me any form of agriculture and do it under artificial lights and show me how it's going to compare to a sun-grown tomato or corn or a pumpkin or anything else. Cannabis was never meant to be grown under lights. No crop really is. I mean, you've got some light extension and some things they do with tomatoes back east or whatnot just to keep them going. But in a perfect world, if we hadn't gone through this war on cannabis, people would have never gone into those rooms and done them under the lights. That's not how they've ever grown cannabis around the world. And we've gotten some great technology for the lights, but they've proven very clearly that you can't get the well-rounded cannabinoid profile or terpene profiles with indoor that you're going to get off outdoor.
Tim, what are the dates of this year's Emerald Cup?
The Emerald Cup this year is December 9th and 10th, Sonoma County Fairgrounds in Santa Rosa. It is going to go on. People thought we might not be able to make it because they heard the fairgrounds evacuated, but it's now just full of animals, and they're slowly moving the people out. And it's going to be a bigger show and better than we've ever done. And it's really taken us a lot of time and a number of years for us to learn how to do a show of this size and scope. Because that's not I don't have a professional background in production. I do shows at Area 101, but there's a much different set of challenges from doing a show for 500 to 1,000 than there are for 25 to 30,000.
You're doing great work, and I wish you all the best this year, even in the difficult times of the fires. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. Our prayers go out to all the people, the victims of the fires, and all the responders that helped, all the fire responders, and all the supporters and contributors that helped really bring that back from where it could have even been much worse. So, we're a great community. I'm very honored to be part of it, and thank you, Joe. You have a nice day.
So, Jeremy Metz is a Patreon supporter of this podcast who wrote me a very heartfelt note several weeks ago. He was looking for some clarity on the topic of teen use. He said, look, it's really hard to separate the fact from the propaganda here. Is moderate responsible teenage use a real concern? Most of my friends started using it when they were teenagers, and most of them are working professionals now. So at what age do the concerns go away? Is it 16, 18, 21? What does science have to say? Could it be helpful to some teenagers as stress relief? Look, I'm trying to prepare my kids for this world, and there's very little advice other than just say no, which is about as effective for cannabis use as it is for teenage sex. So I thought Jeremy's note was apt and right, and I hear this from a lot of people who are trying to navigate this. So that's why we called Marsha Rosenbaum in San Francisco. And Marsha has been working for the DPA for over 21 years, working with kids, talking to kids, listening to kids, working with schools, working with administrators, and working with policy folks to try to make sense of this really thorny issue. So I'm happy to welcome her here and have this conversation. Marsha, it's just great that you're with us today. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Joe.
Tell me quickly how you got into looking at teens and cannabis. What was your background on this, and how long have you been doing it?
So I've been doing it roughly 25 years, and my impetus for getting interested and really looking at drug education and cannabis and all the other drugs really was that I had teenage children. And I became aware of the kind of drug education they were getting in school. And of course, who could miss the ads on TV that were just nonstop? And I knew that that the messages that were getting across or trying to get across to teenagers were a part of a larger picture, mostly around the war on drugs at that time. And it was designed to scare kids. It was not designed to educate them because most of the information in there was just very, very questionable at best. So that was my main interest. I thought, well, what is going on here? And how can we do it better than we are now?
So I got a letter a couple weeks ago from one of our Patreon supporters, a man named Jeremy Mates, who's a father who lives in New York City, and he wrote me with the same exact questions, basically. And I'd like to start this interview by asking you some of the questions he put to me, which are questions I get all the time, by the way. And there are no easy answers. But he says, look, I'm a parent. It's really tough to separate the fact from the propaganda here. Is moderate, responsible teenage use a real concern? Should it be a concern to me? He's a user, obviously. He listens. He cares about the topic. So, Marsha, what would you say to this gentleman?
Let's define moderate use for a minute here. Are we talking about once in a while at a party? Or are we talking moderate use among kids may be different than it is with adults? I think all things being equal, if your kids are doing well in school, if they have extracurricular activities, if they're on their way to college, if they're otherwise doing great, and it's a once in a while thing, and by once in a while, I'm not necessarily even once a week, but once in a while. But then I think you don't have to worry that much. If in every other regard your kids are thriving. Let's put it that way. Are your kids thriving? If your kids are thriving in every other way, and plenty of kids who have been and are thriving, football players, cheerleaders, student body presidents, you name it. Every once in a while, they smoke pot. I don't think it's hurting them.
His next question is, at what age do the concerns start to go away? He's obviously thinking about the developing brain. There's been so many studies out, some saying it really affects the developing brain, others saying it doesn't affect the developing brain. It's very hard to make sense of the scientific information coming at us because every other study says something different. I think this is this gentleman's concern. So at what age are we concerned can we say, okay, the brain has stopped developing, you're okay? If it is at all a concern to the developing brain.
Yeah, and I think going back again to how much and how often, once in a while I don't think it's going to have an impact on the developing adolescent brain once in a while. And of course, it'd be better if kids would delay. That's what we always say. Better to wait. But, they don't often give us that choice. They just make their own decisions. He's going to have to let them go once they graduate from high school. Then they're on their own. And I don't think there's any definitive answer to what age is it just okay? What age does the brain stop developing? We don't know that.
We don't know that. But, so here's another point. Might it be beneficial for some as stress relief or mind opening?
Yeah, and again, the word moderation, I think, is so key in all of this. It depends on if this is a once in a while or does it become a lifestyle. I honestly, frankly, yesterday I went to a conference here in San Francisco of educators dealing with young men's health. And there is a concern that too many kids are coming to school stoned, they're stoned all day, and they are not thriving. So it's hard for me to say anything about, and make any recommendation except moderation.
Okay, a few more questions of his, and then I got my own here. He's saying, does science have anything to really add to the story? This is a big topic. We could talk about it for hours. I don't want to, really, because it's a lot of he said, she said, finger pointing, thising and thating. What does science have to say? Honestly, you've been reading it and studying it and looking at it and looking at all the studies. What's it telling you?
I think that there's nothing actually that's definitive, exactly definitive, that will tell you one way or the other. I know everybody wants to have answers, but I think one thing that seems pretty clear is that the longer kids wait to use marijuana, to try marijuana, the better. When young people start using every day, all day, then it becomes a problem. They're much more vulnerable to getting into abusive patterns. Well, that is an abusive pattern, but dependence happens, and so it's all about delaying as much as one can, and not doing it very much or very often.
So his next question is, look, the just say no approach is about as effective for cannabis as it is for teenage sex. And in a way, delay is just say no. So, well, how do you distinguish between the two?
I think with delaying, what you're doing is you're giving an advice based on some of the data that we have that says that young people who start too early and use too much get into trouble. So I think that's you're actually looking at what we know from the data. And just say no, though, is I like to use the term just say KNOW instead of no. But the problem with just say no is that it historically has been backed up with all kinds of punitive measures, and I think punishment is not the way to go. It's not a very good deterrent, and so I actually see a difference between just say no and delay. As a parent, I think abstinence is the best choice. And just that's how I felt as a parent. I still think abstinence is the best choice all around. But we don't often have that option. So my feeling then and now is, if you can't have abstinence, what is your plan B? Are you just going to stop talking, punish them more, or are you going to try and give them harm reduction information or direct them to places where they can get what we call harm reduction information, so that if you can't have abstinence, at least you can have safety?
Well, you're a parent. I mean, where are you really going to send your kid for good information? I mean, the kid comes to you, you're talking to the kid. Aren't you the best harm reduction source?
Well, sometimes I think the kids know more than we do about drugs, frankly.
You know they do.
Yeah, and so this whole notion that the parent has all this information to convey is kind of a myth. But I think that there's websites, but what I always say about websites is the same thing. If you go to a website and it's nothing but good things, It's all one direction. Cannabis is great. It can't harm you. It's God's gift. Whatever you want to say. Or another website which says cannabis. Jeff Sessions. Cannabis will kill you. It's terrible. The ramifications are awful. So any website that isn't balanced, I say go click. Go on. But there are websites, you look at them and they talk about the risks, the benefits, and it's much more of a balanced approach. As long ago Andrew Weil did in his book From Chocolate to Morphine. So I think you can get good information, but the website has to be balanced. Has to include all kinds of information.
But you talk a lot about being really honest with your kids, and I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, because I think kids actually really respond to honesty. They see through a lot of bullshit, especially parental bullshit. So, do you talk about the positive aspects of substances with your kids?
Sure. I mean, one message I frankly gave to one of my children when I thought, maybe a little bit too much pot smoking, maybe. This is years and years ago. But my message was, okay, so evidently you like marijuana. Okay. Well, it's in your interest to use moderation, because if you overdo it on almost anything, eventually you're going to have to stop, and stop forever. So, I do believe that there's benefits and risks, and I was honest. I couldn't be anything but honest. I mean, if I was criticizing the BS I was seeing in drug education and on the ads, I couldn't be part of that. So yes, I think there are benefits, depending on the time, the place, the age of the person, the context, everything.
Well, so
everything that goes.
Your kid's 18 years old, an adult by many measures, and you want to talk about this with him, and you want to talk about, hey, look, there are good things I've gotten from it, and there are, also some bad things you need to be aware of. What do you say? How do you list what the good things are? How do you talk about it?
So I like to talk more as a sociologist, more in the third person, let's say. People report that. Marijuana it's a sharing experience. People report this, that and certainly much more so actually before it became legal in so many states. It was something it was like a bonding kind of a cultural thing that set you apart.
Absolutely.
Set them apart. And then it's also if you like food, yeah. Marijuana seems to be, it's like an MSG for all of one's senses.
Yes.
All of them. Taste and sight and even hearing, and sex
and touch. Absolutely.
So it's all of those things. It can be giggly. And it can, it also, then there's the medicinal part of it, which sometimes it's hard to, divide. But there's sleep for people who are, having difficulty sleeping. There's the ability to focus in on a movie, for example, and get into other kinds of visuals that way. So sure, there's lots of. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a movement to legalize marijuana if there weren't things about it.
Obviously, and that's why Just Say No seems so ridiculous.
The question I've gotten, I've done dozens and dozens and dozens of presentations to parents, usually through PTAs. Yep. And there's one consistent question.
What is it?
There's a lot of questions, but there's one that comes up each and every lecture I give.
Me.
And that is, I don't know what to tell my kids about my own past, sometimes present use.
Yeah, it's a great question.
I don't know. What should I say?
What's your answer?
So my answer is this. I think that honesty is going to be your best policy, because otherwise, because this is what happened to me. This was my big lesson. So I have a younger sister, and 2 years younger. And my sister, like I've seen this in other families as well, loves to tell my kids all about my escapades in younger years. So you could, people can decide they don't want to tell their kids they ever used this stuff, or they did and it was the most terrible thing that happened, and they're so happy they don't do it anymore. And the cannabis then, which wasn't called cannabis then, mostly. The marijuana then was way less potent and less dangerous and less addictive than it is now, and so they'll do that. But then you're sitting around Thanksgiving dinner, and suddenly your sister or your brother is having just a grand old time telling your kids, "Oh God, you should have seen what she did. Oh my God, all that." So now you've been busted.
Yep.
So I say, don't lie. I don't think it's a good thing to do in terms of getting your kids to trust you and believe in you.
But what is? I mean, okay, delay. Gee, thanks, Mom. I mean,
Yeah.
I just know that isn't that effective. I have kids, I have nephews as well, and I know that, they're not going to delay if they don't really feel it. That's all there is to it. And also, teenagers, it's not about delay. It's about being impetuous and taking a hold of life by the horns. Let's face it. That's what being a teenager is, to a certain extent. Maybe hormonal, who knows what it is. But I remember it very distinctly. There's a just go forward, don't look back quality. So delay, it's not going to necessarily resonate. What about, instead of just say no, do you say maybe? Do you say do it with me? I mean, look, let me say one more thing. With alcohol, I grew up in an Italian-American family. When I was a kid, 13, my parents sat me down at the bar. They poured me wine, they poured me scotch, they poured me bourbon. They said, "Look, kid, here's how you drink it. Make sure it has ice. Make sure you drink water in between each alcohol drink. Sip it." Of course, I went out and got loaded in the next week. Okay, drunk out of my mind. But I know that lesson actually served me well over time. I know it because in college I wasn't a wreck as much as other people I know were. It actually did have an effect. Now, is that a strategy? Is that a good strategy for talking to kids? Doing it with them.
I think it has worked really well for a lot of people. And getting back to certainly we know a history of alcohol and teaching kids how to use alcohol responsibly. Mm-hmm. And we have Europe as an example, some places in Europe and all of that. So with cannabis, it's been prohibited for so long. It's hard to even talk about it or go there. But there are people who decide on a certain age, when they think their kids are mature enough, even if they are in high school, and they say, do it here. I'll do it with you. Just these are people I know or I've heard of other people this happening to. It can be a bonding experience with parents and their kids. It can actually help the relationship. So and I think really in the end, kids are going to do what they're going to do. So you can try to give them all kinds of lessons and all that, but they're going to have to get out there in the world themselves.
And they're gonna do it.
And they're going to and figure it out, and then with their friends and all of that. We can give advice. We can be role models. I think being role models is good. But they're going to go out there and they're going to eat too much of that brownie. They're going to end up on the couch. And that's how they're going to learn not to eat the whole brownie.
Yeah, and it's never going to kill them, thank God. Now, you talk also in your book, Safety First, that it may be a good idea to include students in the development of drug ed programs.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yes, I think in the development and certainly in the what shall I call it, in the execution of a program, it has to be participatory. It just does it. That you have to engage the kids, and that's a pretty easy subject to engage them in.
Don't you think?
Oh, I do. And so I think the old, lecture style. This is what this drug is. This is what it does. This is why you shouldn't do it. This is how dangerous it is a really it's over. It's really over. The kids have to be part of this. It's about them, after all. So.
It's just reminding me when I was reporting my book, I was in San Francisco, and my then 16-year-old nephew, who was very amused at what I was doing, writing about cannabis, came into the house one night and said, "Hey, Uncle Joe, there's a bunch of kids getting stoned on the corner. You want to go interview them?" And I I laughed and I said, "All right, kid, sit down. Now I got to tell you why I'm doing what I'm doing." And it really opened up a dialogue that I don't think my sister was necessarily prepared to open up, but I learned that he knew a whole lot more about cannabis, more drugs actually, than we had ever known, because actually the conversation had never really, this is a very open family, but the conversation had never really been broached. So I thought it was great. And I thought I have to tell this kid what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, because I think the laws are silly, misplaced. I think people are suffering. I think there's no honesty really discussed with this, and I feel I feel that cannabis should be treated just like alcohol, and we have a good dialogue as a result of it. I think it opened up a whole family discussion as a result.
Then why didn't you go interview the kids on the corner?
I don't need to hear what they had to say. It wasn't what I was writing.
Oh, I would have.
I wasn't what I was writing about. I know I was that kid on the corner. This wasn't hard for me to understand what they were just getting high. But why would you? What would you have wanted to talk to them about?
I want to know what they know, and it's fascinating to hear what they know.
A lot.
And some of what they know is not so much.
That's true.
Yep. There's a lot of misinformation out there too. But I can't help it. I'm a sociologist, and pretty much anybody who'll talk to me on the street about this stuff is fair game for me. I used to love doing it when 20 years ago, when we were just starting to legalize medical marijuana, and I would be in I was going to say a foreign city. Some other city besides San Francisco or New York, and for some reason, and I would I'd ask people. I look very conventional, and so I would approach people and ask them, to settle an argument I was having with a friend, and ask them what they thought of medical marijuana, for example. And I just love doing that, because I got, I'd be in, Tallahassee, Florida, for example, or Atlanta, Georgia, or not here. And
not San Francisco.
And people,
right, not San Francisco. That's where you are.
Not San Francisco, right? And I would hear from older people. Usually, that's who I like to stop, and hear surprising things. I thought I was going to get all kinds of pushback on this. No, I didn't. Everybody knew somebody who had cancer, and they tried everything, and then finally somebody somehow got them some marijuana, and it allowed them to eat. And so that was a good lessons for me. But I'd still do it today. Just I want to know what they know.
Maybe I'll write my next book on that. I'm not really sure I want to know, but it's not a bad idea. But tell me, what should a parent not do?
Well, I think worst practice is, again, dishonesty. I think overreacting is a bad idea, and I always say breathe, take a deep breath, because a lot of parents are not like your listener. They don't know what to do. They are concerned. They're fearful, and and they react in fear and too much punishment. I think what is the advice? What they should do is stop and try and listen. If you can get your kid to talk to you, that's your best bet. So I think being a good listener is really important. Trying to understand the world they're living in, which is not the world we're living in. It's a different world. So getting into teenage culture, I once thought people should, force themselves to watch MTV, and just to kind of
certainly.
get it.
That's really a thing of the past. That's nostalgia at this point.
There you go. But so I think what not to do, and is you have to talk about what to do and what not to do. I think being a good role model, using moderation yourself, is really, I think, a good idea. Lock up your stuff. I mean, if parents are using edibles or anything, don't just set it out there on the counter.
Really. I mean, that's a really good idea, right?
Yeah, but I mean, that is where you can get into some serious trouble. Don't lock up your stash, I would say. Be yourself what you want your kids to be. That's pretty much it. I think it's relatively simple. And learn as much as you can as a parent. That's another thing. Go on those websites and look or read. There's still, people still read actual books, and I would advise that.
Where can people get a copy of your book, Safety First?
You can get it. You can get it online at www.safetyfirst.org. It's all in the drugpolicy.org website. That's who I work with. And there's information for ordering booklets. It appears in many different languages now, but order the booklets. You can get as many as you want, and they're free, and the warehouse will just send them out. So I would recommend going on drugpolicy.org/safetyfirst, SAFEY.
Before, I want to ask you one more question. And this is a question that occurs to me all the time. If cannabis were as potentially harmful as it has been said to be, it's now been a part of American culture since really 1960. That's over 50 years, close to 60 years. Yeah. Wouldn't we see the effects of this in our everyday lives? Wouldn't we see this in front of our faces? I mean, we see the ravages of alcohol in front of us every single day. Why don't we see this? I don't see it with cannabis. Do you? What am I missing?
Yeah, I think we would have seen some evidence. And the evidence that we have seen, most people, you have to remember, who used cannabis as young people, as teenagers or in their 20s, most people stop using it and maybe take it up again later when they're older. And
it is. Yeah.
Or they don't have children anymore, or their children have grown, and they're less worried about what the impression their children are going to get on them, so they stop. And we have so many examples of very successful people who are publicly well known. So I don't know.
So just after I stopped recording with Marsha, I realized there was a crucial question I failed to ask, which is, what do you do if your kid is overusing? And this is what she told me. She wrote back, if a teen's marijuana use seems to be all-consuming, if their grades are dropping, or if they're interested in little other than smoking, eating, or vaping, then nothing seems to snap them out of it, I would seek help. Some kids are not open to counseling, so parents might need to sweeten the pot, so to speak, with enticements, something the kid wants but doesn't have. They should be careful, however, about the kind of help they seek. Approaches that carry the same just say no message are unlikely to impact any behavior. Punishment's not likely to change it either. Some harm reduction therapies, on the other hand, can be super productive. With some research, parents in New York or San Francisco can access harm reduction therapy for teens. I'd suggest going online to find therapists who work with teenagers in specific. They can call to learn their approach. First, go to Stanton Peele's website. That's Stanton, P-E-E-L-E, and read his articles and books, including Addiction Proof Your Child. After all, there is little that is more frightening than a child who is failing. On our next episode, we're going to talk about why cannabis is still considered the medication of last resort, especially in regards to the opioid crisis. There's a lot of research that shows that cannabis can really help people wean off opioid pain medications and help them relieve their pain at the same time. So this is a crisis that's killing over 100 U.S. citizens a day. And our interview will be with one of the smartest women in the healthcare industry, Pamela Hadfield. She's one of the founders of Hello MD. She's very articulate, very well informed, and I hope you'll tune in and hear it. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.
Hello, faithful podcast listener. I'm the Incredible Jeff.
And I'm the amazing D-Man.
And together, we host Fueled by Deathcast, a weekly podcast show from Death Wish Coffee Company, the makers of the world's strongest coffee.
That's right, and you can find us every Thursday on deathwishcoffee.com, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, Google Music, and more.
And watch us live on the Death Wish Coffee Company Facebook page and check out all our videos on YouTube.
We bring you the latest interesting news in the science world, an exclusive look at the world's strongest coffee company, and a special guest every week.
The guests could be rock stars, actors, authors, athletes, or even astronauts, and we ask them all the question, what fuels you?
So tune in every week to find out the answer, get inspired, and fuel your passion with Fueled by Deathcast.